Hi everyone, thank you for joining this webcast. My name is Nimrod Geva and I manage Quizcom's product group, which means I'm in charge of our product design and on managing our product roadmap. We've been developing add-ons and apps since 2005 and we have plenty of them. Most of them are small plugins, each designed to solve some issue or overcome some gap in SharePoint and SharePoint Server and SharePoint Online. And I took just one screenshot to show you some other apps that we have for SharePoint Online. You can find most of our apps on the Microsoft App Store. Now, today I'm going to focus on a really brand new package that includes several apps. This package is called DataView Tools for SharePoint Online, and it's a bunch of SPFX web parts. These web parts are based on the Microsoft new SharePoint framework, and all my demos will be based on modern pages, and you'll see how the new SPFX web parts behave. What do we have in the DataView toolset? So we have a couple of web parts. The first one is called ListView Plus, and what it does, it connects to a local list or library or to a remote list or library. It doesn't matter, it can be anywhere, and it displays it in a much more enhanced way. I'll show you what you can do there when comparing to the regular list views. The second web part that I'd like to show you is called the List Aggregator. Originally, it was designed to aggregate list and library data across sites and site collections, but it does a lot more than this because it can connect to many other data sources such as Graph API, which allows it to aggregate data from OneDrive or from Azure Active Directory or from Exchange Online. So I'll show you some very nice demos. So it can aggregate data across several data sources. The next app that I hope I'll be able to show is called Image Gallery, and it does the same thing. It aggregates data, but it just displays it in different image controls. And the last one that not the last one, almost the last one that I'll show you today is the org chart, which again can connect to various data sources and display a couple of different org chart layouts, very flexible. Coming up next month is the Calendar Plus web part. Again, connects to many types of data sources and displays them in calendar controls such as daily view, monthly view, agenda view, and so on. Now, on top of all these SPFX web parts, we have the DataView Plus, which actually is a superset of all these web parts. So if a customer requires both aggregation and org charts, he better go with the DataView Plus because DataView Plus includes all the functionality of all these web parts. Plus, it includes one additional very nice feature, which is custom templates. And I'll show you some examples what you can do with custom templates. Okay, so one last thing that I wanted to mention before going to my demos. So how does it work? All these web parts are quite similar. They have two parts. One part is the data source connections, and each web part can connect to different data sources. As I mentioned, we can connect to SharePoint, to Excel files, to Graph API. And once one of these web parts connect to a data source, you can now configure how to display that data in a very flexible way, and you'll see why I call it Lego style way. And the result is all kind of layouts where you can display to your users not just the data like in list views, but you can add your custom actions, custom menus, and item actions, and you have full control over the layout of the display data and over the actions that you can add allowing your users to do something with their data besides check in, check out, edit, view, the regular generic SharePoint actions. Okay, so let's start with some demos. Actually, that's all I have now, only live demos. So I'll start with the very basic. I'll start with the List View Plus, and I'll show you why I call it Lego style. So I'm going here to my, let's close Outlook, don't need it now. Okay, I want to create a new List View Plus web part here. So this is a modern page, right? And it's empty right now. I'm editing the page. And once you add the Data View Plus package to your tenant or to your site, you'll see the following web parts in the web part gallery. So you see there's the Data View Plus here, and you see there's a list aggregator, List View Plus, an org chart, and picture gallery. So I'm going to choose the List View Plus. List View Plus can connect to a single list. It can be local or remote. So to edit the web part, this is the way you work with SPFX web part. You go here and you click the edit web part icon, and you get this toolpart on the right side. So List View Plus can connect to a SharePoint list or library. It can be on the current site or in some other site. So I'm going to choose a subsite because I don't have anything here in this site. So I'm going to choose subsite sub1, and I know I have here a task list or task 1, I think. And once I choose the list, immediately you will see the result here. This is how SPFX work, the SPFX client-side web parts. So everything I do in the tool part, immediately you see the result. It's very nice. Okay, so I can connect to a remote list, then connect to a remote view, and I can limit the number of items or not limit the number of items. I can also apply my CSS file, and I can also apply caching. Caching is less relevant here when you connect to a single list. It's more relevant, you'll see, when I try to retrieve thousands of items from Azure Active Directory for my org chart, for example. So no need to configure this. I can configure it not to cache at all. That's it. I have my data source and I have my data here. So let's save this. And you see I got some default display here. So I have here some menu bar with export to CSV and delete selected. So I can select files and it will tell me how many items are selected and I can delete them or not. I have here a grid display, and this grid display has some default item actions like view properties or send item by email. So if I click this, it will open my Outlook and create an email message with some properties that I configured. And I can edit the item and so on. So I got some default grid here, and I have paging also, and I can change the paging and so on. And I also have a bottom menu bar. This is by default. I didn't do anything. Now let's start playing what I call Lego. So I'm editing again the page, and now you'll be able to see what's going on here. We have these controls. So on the top we have a menu bar. This is why we see these two menus here. Then we have a paging control and a table control that shows this grid. Okay, so let's change the table control into a more responsive layout, a list control. So now I'm this, and let's save and see what we get here. So now it's the same list, but the layout is different. You have a title and you have a line, which I didn't configure, and another smaller line. And if I shrink the browser a bit like an iPhone, you see that this display is really responsive. It looks like a mobile view. And of course, each control, let's go back to edit mode. This list control, like any control, I can edit it. You see here the configure control icon. So if I go here, for example, you got all these configuration properties like title, and you see here the subtitle, which is the second line of each item, shows a static sentence, but I can change it by clicking Edit Formula. Let's put here, I want to show here the description of every task. And immediately you see the result, okay? Let's click here, so you see the second line change. And I can configure more settings here for this. For example, you see these item actions where I showed you I can view item, email item, and so on. These are the item actions. And of course, I can change them to something else, and I'll show you some examples. Okay, so this is the list control. Let's go back to a table control. And now let's say I want to group my data using tabs, for example. So what I can do above the paging control, you see every control has this insert control above. And I can choose control that I can insert above. So let's add the tabs control. Okay, so, and let's save it. Okay, so once I added the save control, it added some tabs by task status. This is the default. But of course, I can change this default. Let's add it. Let's edit the page again. And I can do it in several ways. One way is simply drag a column to the tab area. So let's say I want to group by assigned to instead. So now it's grouped by the assigned to user. And if I want to do some more configuration, again, I'm going here to configure control for the tabs. And on the right side, I can change the group by. Let's go back to, I don't know, task status. You see that the tab text shows the value and the number of items in the tab. This is because by default we use here a formula that you can change, of course. But this is the formula. I didn't write it. It's here by default. This is what makes each tab show the number of items. Let's render it more as tabs, so you'll see the background becomes dark. It will have a better look. Okay. Now, I can change these tabs to another way of grouping, to groups. Groups will show accordion sections, like we see now. Let's save the page. And you see these are accordion sections. It's a different way of grouping. I can export each group to CSV, and it also shows me the number of selected items in each group if I select some items. So it's a different layout. And of course, we saw that we have some paging at the bottom. This is because we have a paging control. So the paging control is here. Let's configure it. Again, I'm clicking here to configure the paging control. And you see it has some settings like the default page size, which I can change, to various navigation buttons that are displayed. I can also show paging above the content or below. I'm not showing it right now, but I'm showing only paging below the content. So this is kind of the Lego, and of course you can delete every control. You have here a menu bar where you see some menus. And you can change these menus. So if I click here to customize the menu bar, you see that we have the 3 actions, and I can add additional, and I have the bottom action, and I can change the actions or add new actions. And I'll show some example about custom actions, custom item actions and custom menu bar actions. So this was really a quick demo to show you the experience of connecting to a data source and then playing with the controls to customize the layout of the displayed data. Okay, so moving ahead, next thing I'd like to show you is some dynamic filters. Whenever you are displaying data, it doesn't matter if it's a single list or aggregation, you need to provide users a convenient way of finding the information they need from that list by using filters. Now, the nice thing is one of the available controls here is a custom filter panel where you can configure the exact filtering controls that you want to give users. So let's see a nice example here. So I'm going to another page that I created here. Okay, so here I'm connected again to a list. This list is different. It's not a task list. It's a, let's make it bigger. It's event budget requests. And you can already see some things are different in this list. You see that it's the control that I'm using is not a grid. It's a list control, the responsive one. You can also see that I changed some of the item actions. So I have here show on map because every event takes place in some city, like Richmond Hill, Newmarket, Toronto, cities in Toronto area. So if I click this show on map, sorry, click the wrong one. No, I didn't configure it properly. Maybe I'll do it with you later. So I have some custom actions here, but I want to discuss how I add filters. So to add filters, again, I'm editing the page. And let's add above the paging control, let's add a filter control. So I'm clicking here, insert control above, and I'm selecting the filter control. Okay, so by default, I'm saving this page. By default, it adds just a free text search. So for example, and this searches in all the list columns. So if I'm just want to search, okay, show me all the events in Toronto, so I can just type the beginning of Toronto and it will show me only the events taking place in Toronto. Okay, but maybe I want more than just free text. I want to provide filters. So editing again the page, when you're in edit mode, you have this plus icon in the filter control, allowing you to add more filters. And you see all the columns that you have here. So let's add a filter for budget of every event, and maybe let's add some more event date. This would show a date control and a city. Okay, so I added these three controls, and you know what? I don't want the search. I want user to use only my filters. So I'm configuring the control, and here I have show free text filter. I'll switch it to off, and that's it. And let's see the results. So I'm saving this. So I have my three controls. Now each control allows you to work in several ways. You can you always have some picker which is relevant to the type of the control. The budget is a numeric control, so I have this range control that allows me to filter by range. Or I can simply select from available budgets that are available in the filtered list. So I can select one, or I can select multiple, or I can select all except. Same thing with date. I have a specific calendar range control because it's a date control. So I can say, okay, show me all the events starting, you know what, let's filter some. So only from end of July until November. So it will show me only these two. But I can also select some from the dates that are available in this list. So I can select one, or select multiple, or select all except the ones that I selected. It's very flexible. Or I can type even the date, even though I don't like typing dates here. And same goes with city. I can type the name of the city, like Barrie, and it will filter to show me only events starting with this text, or I can pick from the ones available here. So let's select Barrie and Richmond Hill. Okay, now, and of course I can clear all filters. And you can add additional filters by simply editing the page, same as I did. Now, if the user is using a table control, let's go back to view mode. End user can also, the filters that I added now, I added as the admin, as the one who configures the control. But we also allow end user to add temporary filters for the current session. They can do it in view mode. They cannot edit the web part, but they can just drag the column that they want to filter by. So let's say I want to filter by work phone, doesn't matter. So I drag the column, same as I did with tabs, to this area, and now I can also filter by work phones, okay? So, but once the user starts a new session of the browser, he will not see. It's not persistent. The only persistent filters are the one configured for the web part by the admin. Okay, so these are custom filters. Next thing I wanted to show you is aggregation scenario. So up until now, I used the most simple web part, which is the list view web part, which connect to a single local or remote list or library. The list aggregator can aggregate data from several sources. Let's start with the first scenario, where, which is a classic EPM enterprise project management scenario, where you have a top-level site and many sub-sites, where each sub-site is a project sub-site, which is with its own tasks, milestones, risks, and so on. And as the EPM officer, I would like to have a broader view, which aggregates, for example, all delayed tasks or all upcoming milestones, and so on. So I need a tool that runs a query across all my project sites, project subsites, and retrieves, according to this query, the information from all the subsites. Oh, sorry. So let's see how this works. I see that there is a question. If you don't mind, I'll take the questions at the end of the demos. I'll just go over them one by one, so don't worry, I won't miss any question. Okay, so I'm going to another demo. This time it's a list aggregator demo. It will look the same because, again, it's the same controls, but different data sources. Okay, so here we have a scenario. In this scenario, I have about 10 subsites, each subsite with 10,000 tasks, and I'm aggregating using a query that retrieves late tasks. And as you see, I configured it to show me these filters. You know how I do it by now. And I also configured the tabs control to group by task status. So nothing new about here. Let's edit the page now. And you'll see the controls that I already described last time. So we have a menu bar and a filtering control and a tabs control and a table control. What's interesting here is the data source. So I'm editing the web part. This time I'm not connected to a single list. This time you see data source type is SharePoint List Aggregator. And the list aggregator can connect to additional data sources that you didn't see before. So it can also retrieve data from Excel files. It doesn't have to be, these Excel files can locate it on any library, or from Graph API, which I will show shortly. So now I'm connected to a list aggregation service. And how do we aggregate? To aggregate data, you need to run a query. So we don't provide you with a query editor. We prefer to use a working mechanism in SharePoint, which is a list view. A list view is actually a query definition. It defines what columns you want to get, in what sort order, and what filter do you want to run, and so on. So we use, in order to run a query, we ask you to select a list view that will be used as the query definition. Here you should select a site where this list view exists. I use the current site. and I'm using the task list and a view which is called late task. So all of this defines the query that I'm going to run across several sites. Then you can configure some limits if you want of maximum number of items you want to be retrieved because your view sorts by ID or by creation date, and you want to get only the top or the latest 2,000 items and not all of them. It's up to you. You can also configure a limit of items per list, and then you create your data source. So up until now, we configured the view, the query that will be used to query the data, and now we need to configure the data sources that this view, this query definition will run against. So you see I have here one data source. I can add many, and let's see how it was configured. So you give it a friendly name, project tasks, okay, and then you select the aggregation scope. So it can be specific site and subsite. That's what I want now. I want to dynamically aggregate from all the subsites below the current site, and I chose this. I chose this over specific list, for example, which I could use, because if I choose specific list, it's static. Then okay, I can choose several task lists. But in this case, this is a dynamic case, because when you have a site per each project in your company, and projects are dynamically created, you don't want to be in a situation where every time a new project site is created, you have to go back to this web part and reconfigure it to add this new project site. So specific site and subsites creates a dynamic aggregation scope. Anytime you add additional subsite, they will be included in the aggregation. And you can do also entire site collection or specific site or specific list. So I choose specific site and subsites. Then you configure the root of the aggregation. I want the current site, which is the EPM portal and subsite. Then you can also limit the aggregation scope by various properties. For example, let's say I want to aggregate not all task lists, but only task lists that have a specific naming pattern, or maybe only from sites that have some specific naming pattern. I can also limit by list type. So I choose task, and I can choose several types, by the way. So I can, in one aggregation source, I can include both tasks and milestones, for example. You can mix several. And finally, you can also limit your aggregation scope by content type. So let's say I don't want all task lists, only task lists that inherit some additional content type. So all of these enable you to really fine-tune your data source. And same way, you can create multiple data sources. So not just one like I did now. And once you do it, that's it. You got your aggregation, and from here, like I did before, no need to repeat, you can select the controls that you want to display your data and so on. Okay, next demo that I want to show you with the list aggregator shows a different aggregation scenario, and this time I'm not using the SharePoint aggregation source, but I'm using Graph API. Now, for those of you that don't know what Graph API is quite a new API from Microsoft, which is actually a hub. It allows you, using one consistent API, to connect to many cloud resources. It can be Azure Active Directory, Exchange Online, OneDrive files. Up until now, before Graph API, you had to learn a separate API for each such resource, and Graph API presents a unified, consistent API for developers to easily connect to any of these cloud sources, including many others that I didn't mention, such as OneNote pages and many others. So I'm going to show you two examples. One of them is how I connect to Azure Active Directory to aggregate user information. And the second one is display documents, my recent documents from OneDrive. Okay, so I'm going to my first example, aggregator Azure. And again, you'll see the same aggregator because I'm using the same controls, but the data source here is different. Here I'm connecting to a data source of about 7,000 users in Azure Active Directory. And caching is not, here caching is dramatic, has dramatic influence because you have to be in a good day to get information from Azure Active Directory fast enough. Now we are in a cloud environment, you're connecting through a network, everything, nothing is local here, so you really depend on the response type of Graph API and network. And with heavy, big organizations that have thousands of users, this may be critical. That's why we introduced, especially for here, for this case, a caching mechanism. And you see this flag here on the right that says new data is available. This is the caching indicator that lets me know that since last time I displayed this information, new information was added, so it needs to be refreshed. And while it loads in the background, we keep loading data. So this here, for example, it takes about 10 to 15 seconds as I see it. Yeah, not the best. Here, now the cache is ready. Without the cache, it would take, because of pure physics, it would take about 30, 40 seconds. Depends. If you're in North America, in the West Coast, East Coast, Europe, it really depends to which server you're connecting. Okay, so how is it configured? Let's look at the configuration here. So we have a table control and paging, that's it. And we bring the name from Active Directory, the email, mobile phone, photo, and so on. Let's see how this control is, how the data source is configured. So this time I'm connected to Graph API. And once you choose Graph API, you have these load graph examples. And we prepared some ready-to-use examples like load Active Directory users, current user profile, my contacts, my recent files. We're going to load some more. Once you select such an example, it loads all the relevant fields that you need in order to connect to Graph API. So there's the graph path and the selected columns, and all of these are filled by selecting the example. Of course, you can add your own columns, and there's a filter statement, and this looks a bit technical, but this is how you connect to Graph. There's advanced filtering, and you can limit here the number of items. You can also add expanded properties for Graph API. Now, all of these, once you know what, before this, I'll show you for less technical users. I have a link here for the Graph API Explorer. In case you want to connect to any Graph API service, Graph API includes many services. This is the Graph API Explorer from Microsoft. Okay, it allows developers to get the syntax of the GET request that they have to post in order to get something. So you see there are sample queries here. If you want to get my profile, my photo, or information about users from Active Directory, or information from Exchange Online, you can get, or from calendars, or from OneDrive, Teams, all of these and more is available from Microsoft Graph. So all you have to do if you don't know how to get something, and that's what we did, let's say I want to get all group members, I click here, and I see this is what I should include in my request. So if I'm going back here, this is what I have to put here in my graph path. So this is an example how you get the data. Now, once you got the data, you go to the second configuration page, and this is where you configure column info. What is configure column info? we need to know how you want us to treat each of the retrieved columns from Active Directory. For example, here you see that the photos are showing photos. That's because when you choose here the photo and you configure it, you give us the name and then you let us know what is the type of this data. So we'll know how to render it. And same goes for any of the columns here. We can render as emails or as links or as images. We need to know, and this is when you map the information for us. And it also defines the order of display when you click the show item properties here in the item actions. So it defines what properties you want to display here and how to render them. Okay. Next example that I wanted to show you is again using Graph API. This time is how to retrieve files from OneDrive. So now you can include a web part that includes your files from your project here on SharePoint, and it can also include your recent files or any other type of query for OneDrive. So again, you have here list aggregator that shows the type of the files, and also when you click edit, for example, for this Word document, it will open it in Word Online as expected for edit. Now, if we look again at the data source of this web part, you'll see that the data source again is Graph API, but this time the graph path is different. This brings the current user's recent files, and you have control over the exact columns that you want to fetch and so on. Again, I didn't choose these columns. I just use the example here, my recent files. It populates everything. But again, if you're more experienced with Graph API, you can fully customize it because we opened all the properties, we exposed all the Graph API properties here, so you can really customize the exact path that you want and exact columns and exact filtering statement that you want to use against Graph API. Okay, so this was about list aggregator. And next I want to show you the org chart. Oh, sorry. One thing before the org chart, this is a small web part as well, is the picture gallery, but it works actually quite the same. It just uses different controls. Here you see a photo pile, which is brought from some source. Let's see shortly. And each image I can zoom and so on. And then we have several picture control. And I added a filter. Let's move some pictures here. So I can filter by, let's see, I have some pictures from Madrid. So I can type Madrid and it will filter only the pictures that are from Madrid. Yeah, the network is really slow. I can see pictures are hardly loading. Let's take this one instead. Okay. So how it's configured really quickly. Nothing new here, except that I'm using different controls that are available in this type of web part, which is a picture gallery. So this is a photo pile control, and I can change it to different control like picture gallery or camera slideshow. And if you go to the data source, so you see this time I'm connected to a SharePoint list, but again, I can aggregate images from multiple sites using the list aggregator control or from Excel files and so on. Okay, going to the org chart. So org chart can connect to, again, multiple sources. Org chart can be connected to a SharePoint list, or to Graph API, or to Excel, or to aggregate a list aggregation service. So you can really connect almost to any type of source. In this example, I'm using one of the available controls. So you see it allows me to render different users using different styles, like this is like a note and this is a rectangle, and colors here are different, and of course you can expand items. I control which information is displayed for each user. You can zoom in, zoom out, print, export to PDF, and so on. Now, when you want to show some more information about a user, you just click here this icon and you get his card, and you control what is displaying this card. Now, if you want to see the profile of the user, again, we show the properties that we configure. This is the default that we provide for org chart. And if you want to see the hierarchy of this user in the organization, so you can see his peers and his manager and his staff. And of course, you can click any one to see the details about any other worker. You got some custom actions here. And here, if I choose this one, all these custom actions here, like all this LinkedIn, follow on Twitter, all this is configurable. Like you saw in the list aggregator and the list viewer, we have item actions, same thing. You can control these actions. Of course, as you can see, I also use the filter control, because if you have a big organization, you're not supposed to look for someone just by starting searching each node in the tree, especially if it includes hundreds or thousands of users. So it's really natural to connect the filter control to the org chart and look for people by their job title or by their name or by any other property that you would like to add to your org chart. Now, of course, you can configure this org chart. Let's see what configuration option this control has. So as for the data, you see that this is connected to a SharePoint list. Okay, and once you connect to a SharePoint list, you need to map the columns that are required for the org chart. So what to display for the name, what column should be displayed as the position, manager, and so on. Now, as for the display configuration for this org chart control, so you can control the number of levels opened by default. As you see, 2 levels are opened by default, and the default zoom control and line type, straight or curved, or orientation, like this is top down, let's change it to left to right, for example, and we'll see the result immediately here, as you can see. And let's go back here, and you can select from various themes. There are many themes here, and colors and default controls that you want to show here, zoom controls and search and print and so on. And as I said, you can also control which actions will be available when you view an employee card. You can add your own. Now, this is just one of the controls. Let's go to another example where I have a different control. I called it, org chart connected to Azure Active Directory. So the previous one that I showed you connected to a SharePoint list. This one connects to Azure Active Directory through the Graph API. And I also use a different chart control, so it looks different. And you see here that cache is up to date, okay? And I can again zoom in, zoom out very similarly. I can expand the chart. You see that I can also do some conditional formatting, because this one has a different background, and because I configured it to be this way, I have here different search filters. Let's see the configuration options for this type of control. So this one is called Organization Chart by DHMalytics, and previously you saw this one. So we have 2 org chart controls and a persona control. We're going to add more and more because it's quite easy once you have the structure set up. So this one has some different controls. Again, it has default zoom. You can control the maximum height. Here it has some more powerful rendering options, because sometimes you want part of your tree, part of your org chart to be rendered horizontally and some parts vertically. And it depends mainly about on the number of sub items that a node has, because you don't want to create a horizontal scroll. So here I created a rule that as long as you have less than 6 employees under you, your level will be rendered horizontally. And if it's above 6, it will be rendered vertically. That's why you see in level 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 employees in the second level rendered horizontally, but each one of them is rendered vertically because it has more than 6 people in its staff. And you can, as I said, control what is displayed as the name field and position field. Everything is controlled by formulas. I'm not getting very deep into it right now, but it is super flexible. You can use columns like I do, but you can also use knockout script to add some logic here if you want. And you can also, as you saw, actually here I didn't show it to you, you can also control which exact custom actions you have here. So you see we have these custom actions, but you can also call phone or send email. All other aspects are quite the same in the employee card. Another thing that I wanted to show you, is the custom actions that I mentioned. So you can add item custom actions or global actions. Let me see if I have a working example here. Let me go here. I think it's in the list aggregator page. Sorry for that. I'm looking for an example that I didn't prepare here. Yeah, the event budget. So I showed it to you previously. It didn't work so nicely. Let me see why. So you see here, I have this event budget, and I have some custom item actions. And also, you see again, I have some conditional formatting. The event date here is blue if it's due, and it's red if it's passed already. So I have this phone icon. When I click it, it will open Skype for Business to make the call. And I have here show on map. When I click it, it will open a pop-up showing the city. This one is in Richmond Hill, so you see Richmond Hill, and this event is in Newmarket, so you'll see Newmarket. Okay, so how do you do it? Very easy. We have plenty of snippets. So what you do, I'm going here to edit the control, the list control, and you have here item actions. And you see the third action is this show on map. How did I create it? When you open it, you have the script editor. So one thing you can do, if you know Knockout JavaScript, you can do whatever you want. We give you these nodes, these entry points, these objects, root, component, item, which you can use to get the current context, get the current column, current item columns, get everything. So you can do whatever you want. But most of our users are not developers. So we have item actions and global actions. Here, for example, you can use these, like I use call phone or show city in map, and it will just put the script here. And for example, if you look at the script, you see that we use item.city, which means we access the current item's city column and so on. And we are using here Google service to show a city on map. So the snippets allow less technical users to use these advanced features like show YouTube video or anything else. More technical users can take it a lot further with Knockout code. One, I think, final thing that I wanted to show you before I start answering questions, is the Data View Plus web part. Now, as I mentioned before, Data View Plus is a superset of all the web parts that I showed you until now, meaning list view web part, list aggregate web part, picture gallery web part, org chart web part, and coming up, I didn't show it because it's not ready, calendar plus web part. DataView Plus includes all the data sources and all the display controls. But it includes one more thing. It includes the ability, besides selecting ready-to-use controls, that's like filter, table, list, to create your own custom control. And here I have an example. I had a customer who asked me for a risk chart. So I asked my R&D guys, hey, can we create a risk chart web part really quickly? And they say, no need, just use DataView Plus. We'll give you very nice HTML with JavaScript that does it and connects, of course, to the data source that you want. You want to connect to a list data source, to a list aggregation source, whatever you want to connect, to Excel, we can do it for you. And so you have this risk. This is connected to a list, to a risks list. And once you hover, this is what we display, and you can change everything here. Now, how was it created? So you see, here you have custom control. You didn't have it in any of the other web parts that I showed you. I always showed you list, table, filter, groups, tabs, and so on. Here you have a custom control. Custom control enables you to simply paste HTML code. And again, you can use, of course, our snippets, our samples, our scripts. We have many of these. So these are the snippets that we have ready so far, like risk metrics, tasks with conditional formatting, and so on. Again, we're going to add more because it's so easy to add them, and because the engine is there. We can connect to data sources, we can use plenty of controls. Now all you need is just nice templates to do whatever you want. And of course, you can add above this filter control, whatever you want. So this, I think, this finalize, yeah, I have this. And what I'm going to do now, oh, sorry, just to let you know how you can get this. SPFX web parts, unlike the regular apps for SharePoint, are not located on the App Store, on the Microsoft App Store, because Microsoft App Store does not support hosting SPFX web parts until now. So the only way to get these SPFX web parts is go to our website and download from there the app file and put it on your app catalog library, and all the instructions are on our website. So to get any of our web parts, you go to our website, go to the menu of Office 365 apps, and under it you have all these apps. Under data visualization tools, you have the org chart, list view plus, list aggregator, data view plus, picture gallery app. All these are the apps, the SPFX web parts that I showed you today. All our apps, including these ones, are available for free trial with no limit. There's no 1 month trial limit. You can try it as long as you want. It's fully functional. You'll just get the message that says that it's a trial. So no rush. You can play with it as long as you want and ask us questions. Okay, now what I'm going to do is go over the questions one by one.